Welcome everybody to this second session of the spring seminar, Narratives of Resistance, here at Boston College. This seminar connects with previous research conducted in Mexico over the past 3 years, together with colleagues from the University Iberoamericana in Mexico City. And now it seeks to connect this collaborative research process with people from social movements and academia across the continent, located in its diverse cultural regions from North America to Central America, and also the Caribbean and South America. Let me briefly introduce the focus of this seminar, or semillero, as I prefer to call it, seedbed probably in English. The discolonial methodology that we explore here starts from the recognition of the diversity of knowledge that each social collective, academic community, and artist community cultivate as way of life, communal organization, and symbolization of re-existence. Beyond the hegemony of Western scholar knowledge, here we wish to learn collectively to name the social resistances facing systemic violence, to think together critically about its processes and strategies, as well as to promote the transformation of these hegemonic structures and practices from the strength of the vulnerable, the everyday life, lo cotidiano, the communal, and the concrete spiritual. So thinking about systemic violence requires complex thinking, in constant listening and dialogue with the practices of resistance. For this reason, we assume here at Boston College in this project a theoretical framework that brings together knowledge and thoughts in which converge the critical decolonial perspective emerging in the epistemic South, in dialogue with the critical theory originated in European post-Marxist thought, and with the intersectionality thinking developed in the United States in recent decades. Indeed, thinking about the resistances of people and communities facing heteronormative patriarchy, extractivist economy, external and internal neocolonialism, as well as the sacrificial version of religion, is an ongoing process. I would say probably a never-ending process. Its objective is to contribute to the elaboration of a kind of communal and political, but also spiritual knowledge, with a strong disruptive charge and poetic force, both capable of transfiguring history of pain and suffering, but from the precarious lives that they are reinventing life in some way as a process of resistance, resilience, and re-existence. This colonial theology, for its part, urgently needs to go through these processes of deconstruction of a religious hegemonic thought that under the cloak of Christianity continues to accompany practices of exclusion today, control and discrimination based on race and ethnicity, sex and gender, social class, and religious affiliation. One of the great challenges for counter-hegemonic theologies will be to return to their original sources of spiritual life and insights about God's mystery, to reformulate in some way ways of life that heal the wounds of the social body and the plundered common home in intimate connection with the divine source of life that animates the whole creation according to diverse spiritual and theological grammars. Specifically, this research project aims to rethink the performativity of the Christian faith in correlation with other spiritualities that have emerged in the past, but also now, are emerging as practices of knowledge, of lives that are vulnerable but resilient, wounded but not defeated, ways of life of people and Christian communities that are expressions of the divine wisdom that reveals itself as a summon to a plenty life in the radicality of Jesus of Nazareth and his messianic community that lives and announces new times amid the broken history of humanity. So let me introduce today's topic. In this context, we approach today a brutal expression of global systemic violence. The forced disappearance of people is a personal, family, and collective drama that requires our cordial, respectful, and supportive attention to the families and collective searching for their beloved ones, alive or in clandestine graves. Specifically, the clandestine graves are a historical, political, and legal document. As Carolina Robledo Silvestres from the GIAS, the research group in social and forensic anthropology, located in Mexico City, has clearly pointed out. By the way, with these colleagues, I have learned the first steps of collaborative research in a decolonial key, and I am very thankful. The forced disappearance of people in Mexico in the last 15 years has dramatically affected close to 100,000 people and their families. It is a social phenomenon linked to forced mobility and human trafficking also by criminal mafias, often in collusion with local, regional, and transnational authorities and companies controlling the world system. On the other hand, the resistance of families members in search of their beloved ones who have suffered forced disappeared is a valuable way of life and resistance that has a human, political, and spiritual meaning. A way of life that creates knowledge about the broken social body and that summons us to a transformation as actors of social change that resolve these violent contradictions of the world system that we are facing in different fronts, from different fronts. So it is therefore an honor to me to introduce today's speakers. First of all, Maya Querales Mendoza. She holds a PhD in anthropology from the Center for Research and Studies in Social Anthropology in Mexico City. Her thesis, Mexicans in Exile, Experiences of Seeking Refuge in the United States between 2008 and 2014, Political and Legal Performances from the Peripheries of the Mexican State. She has also published different chapters in books and articles, and she's really committed working with families of disappeared people. We will welcome later some other colleagues from social movements of the Colectivo Buscadoras por la Paz. I will introduce them later. And now I would like just to open the floor and welcome Maya Querales. She will be in charge of contextualize the great and difficult phenomenon of disappearance and clandestine graves in Mexico. So welcome. Gracias, Mayek, por aceptar esta invitación.
Thank you, Mayek, for accepting this invitation. Welcome. Good afternoon. As Carlos already said, I'm part of a research group for social forensic anthropology. We formed in 2016 with the intention of approaching the technical forensic formation of the families. And this has been one of our tasks. This is one of our strongest tasks over the last 6 years. We give workshops, and I will explain to you a little bit what that's like. I imagine because Carlos was in Mexico, we're going to use the phrase enforced disappearance. For non-Mexican audiences, it's usually confused with missing persons, and that's not the same thing. So I'm going to start with that difference so that we can find our place in this situation that exists in our country. So as Carlos said, our task is to construct counter narratives to violations of human rights in Mexico. Currently, on February 16th of this year, we have a number 97,898 people disappeared since 1964. And this is limited because these are only registered reports. So many families and collectives and people who accompany these groups insist upon mentioning that there's many reports and many disappeared people who are not registered. And over here is a record that the government has of how many people who have been found with or without life. And for the government, this is an important number. These numbers come from the National Register of Disappeared and Found or Unfound People in the country. And unfortunately, there's a whole discourse in our current administration because we can't access the raw data. It's not an open data set. And that's really a violation of transparency laws. We only have some information. So you can find this information online as it gets updated. And so it's important to contextualize this information. And one of the things that we do is identify the age ranges of people who are disappeared, because people don't disappear on their own. Somebody disappears them. That's what we families emphasize, and all of us who are searching also. The range of people who are most frequently disappeared corresponds with young people in our country. And this alarm signal is that women who are disappeared, the majority of them are adolescents, which points us to the existence of human trafficking networks. These are some of the profiles of people who are victims of disappearance. Something that's important and something that I've mentioned to Carlos is that we're going to use the framework of enforced disappearance and not missing people, because that's not the same thing. So those of us in Latin America are working with this topic of forced disappearance. It's important to contextualize why that is. So I'm going to read a little bit so I don't get off track. Something to keep in mind when we talk with audiences who are not from Latin America is that the disappearance of people in our region comes from political, economic decisions and interests. And these cultural markers are important to keep in mind when we're diagnosing our situations in the global South. We have this concept enforced disappearance or forced disappearance. The literal translation of this missing persons and disappeared persons are not the same. In the US, missing persons files are generated for somebody with a mental disability, anybody who's run away, someone who's missing after a catastrophe, someone who might be in physical vulnerability. For us, disappeared persons do not disappear willingly. It's a political disappearance. Or the willingness in the US, it could be willing or not willing. In Latin America, we distinguish between voluntary and involuntary disappearing or missing. People do not disappear on their own. People are disappeared. So let's go step by step. Disappearance is a political administration it's a series of procedures and decisions at an administrative level to disappear somebody because of political or economic
Como tal, no han logrado erradicar la práctica y nos permite por sí solo comprenderla. Particularmente, se trata de un
Particularly, we're talking about a topic that comes from the dirty war.
capaces de incorporar
Um,
circunstancias que actualmente ocurren en nuestro país, en México.
Okay.
La desaparición forzada es una práctica
Forced disappearance is a practice that comes from Nazi Germany, which
dichas personas eran deportadas en secreto, sin que hubiera un testimonio o registro de los hechos, y acto seguido las conducían hacia los campos de exterminio. La consigna era no proporcionar a nadie ninguna información acerca del paradero, y mucho menos de la
I'm sorry, I'm trying to get a handle on it.
Con la finalidad de diseminar el terror entre la población.
So the strategies of forced disappearance came about from Nazi Germany and from the ex-Soviet Union and Latin American dictatorships. It's a terrorist strategy also in order to incur fear in the population. It's a strategy against political activists and guerrilla strategies. A fundamental element for this crime against humanity become part of legislation. As I said at the beginning of the conversation, an important factor in that has been the denouncement of families of disappeared persons. A disappeared person is somebody who has
del recuerdo contra el olvido. Es el resultado de la política de la memoria versus las técnicas de difuminación. Cierro cita. Fue en el contexto de las dictaduras latinoamericanas.
In the context of Latin American dictatorships, the international community recognized this crime as a violation of human rights, whether or not other human rights were being violated at the time. In this cycle here, we're trying to present the relationship that in our country surrounds the situation of disappeared people. So we've been able to achieve the recognition of this violation of human rights in Latin America. And so we began to develop a juridical framework in order to denounce this crime. In 1994,
la Asamblea General de las Naciones Unidas adoptó la Convención Internacional para la Protección de todas las personas contra las desapariciones forzadas. En el caso mexicano, no fue sino apenas hasta 2017 en la materia, con la publicación de la Ley General en materia de desaparición forzada y por particulares y del Sistema Nacional de Búsqueda.
Mayek, ¿podrías hablar más despacio para la intérprete? Por favor.
We're trying to reduce our speed here at which we're talking. So it's important to point out that this law that was published in Mexico in 2017 was not the will of the government. It was a result of the pressure that families have put on the government from 2006. In 2006, with the declaration of war against narco-traffic, the severe violations of human rights have been another focus of our circle. It is the families with their work, with their denouncements, with their searching out in the field, like the search for peace in Sonora that we're going to hear about later, that have made this legislation possible. As far as the practice of disappearance, the circles of violence that have been produced in the context of the war against drugs have been exposed and have supported the ability to denounce these incidents, because the visibility of these violent practices have produced spaces where silence is imposed. the victimizer needs the victim. So fear is what makes these things possible. With the war on drugs, we've been witnesses of how the public forum has been invaded by bodies that are mutilated. Our free transit has been interrupted by confrontations between armed bodies, and incendios, fires, have been a way to get people out of their territories. This repertoire of terrorist practices is disappearance is part of them. Forced disappearance is not a new practice. The state created this practice in a particular situation, and then it generalized it in political campaigns and in different sectors, and people from the armed forces. Organized crime on a national level has generalized it. We can see this in the 21st century, end quote. This participation of the state is what has made the families insist that all disappearance is forced because of the action or omission of the government. This is a crime, moreover, of a continual nature. This continues to happen and update itself. This cycle will continue until we find the person. The situation of disappeared persons is even worse than public assassination, says Roberto Rivas, because it increases the sense of danger, because the person who has disappeared into an imaginary world, an unsafe but probable imaginary world created by the possibility that the person might still be alive. This doubt prolongs the anguish. It's a very productive way to create fear. When we research this, we have to determine who were the perpetrators, what was their motive, who gave the order. In the case of the government agencies, who later came to talk about the judicial procedures around this, this is important information. In the same way, it's important to figure out the ways that people are hidden. So let's talk about the administrative ways that this happens when someone is detained. When someone is arrested or detained, if they're not charged directly, or if their place isn't registered, they may be being tortured. When torture happens, they might die, and so they might disappear. These are protocols that are not carried out correctly, which might produce bodies that are not adequately registered when they arrive to the forensic doctors, and they are buried in common graves that are not registered. And so that's what happens when people die without identification. This is not a small problem in our country. 58,000 bodies have been recovered without having been buried according to these protocols. And these contribute to the number of disappeared persons. This is what we call administrative disappearance. And as far as clandestine graves, it's not just thousands of people who have been buried, but through 2015, the Attorney General's office did not have a protocol to search for disappeared people. So each person did their own research according to the options they had available to them personally, because there was not a standard. So this made it possible for many irregularities in these processes and collection of samples to happen. There was not good chain of custody of samples, DNA samples that people gave. And so we add to this that the majority of clandestine graves have really been found by the families of disappeared people. When they are found by research agencies, it's almost accidental. And so this is reflected in the disparity of the numbers that have been given about this topic. In February 2016, the Attorney General's office reported 662 bodies in 200 and some clandestine graves in 2016 and 15. In 2017, the National Commission for Human Rights presented a count of 855 graves between 2017 2016, and in these 800 some graves, they had found 1,500 bodies. Even comparing this, the Iberoamerican University was looking at social media, looking for particular words like graves, disappearance, and they found many more, 5,000 different individual remains. So in the northern part of the country, and sometimes in the Gulf in Veracruz, the organized crime groups have begun to totally destroy the bodies. That's why we're talking about fragments or remains, because these fragments represent a real challenge for forensic doctors to identify them. The reports that families have filed are the window for justice. These reports have been what allows us to observe the culture in our public ministries to criminalize the victims and to deny them their right to justice for their family members. So up through now, I've been talking about how we can see the failures of the state incarnate in their public servants, police. They decide not to act. They decide that it's not important to register the remains of a body or to bury somebody in an appropriate way according to the proper protocols. Nevertheless, in each one of these situations, we can see the capacity for response that the civilians have. This is the configuration of a new subjectivity that has been woven around the figure of the victim, in this case, of the victim of disappearances. Not in vain, these family members are not secondary victims. This is a category that the state uses to control them. They recognize themselves as searchers. The demand that the searchers have is not just information, they demand justice. Disappeared people come from all of us, and finding them requires a solidarious and interdisciplinary effort. We have to question our own academic formation and how much does it form us to assist in denouncing violence or violations of human rights. Recreating the situations that the search, as our companions will tell you now, is transnational. This is shown by the Caravan of Central American Mothers, the International Caravan for Family Members of Disappeared Peoples, African mothers looking for their children in the Mediterranean and in European countries, and our companions in the US-Mexico border, because the borders are a construct of political states, and we have a right to migrate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maya Querales, for this very particular and accurate exposition about what the disappearance means today in a global perspective, and including different disciplines like anthropology, forensic and social anthropology, but also sociology. Now I would like to introduce our next speakers who are members of the very important colectivo of families searching for their children. It's my pleasure to introduce here and welcome, first of all, one of the founders of this colectiva, Cecilia Delgado Grijalva. She's founder of Colectivo Buscadoras por la Paz Sonora in 2019. And she initially dedicated her life to finding her treasure, her son, Jesus Ramon Martinez Delgado, whom she searched for almost 2 years. And since then, he was private for his freedom in Hermosillo, and who she found in December 2020 in a clandestine grave. But since then to date, she remains in search for people accompanying other mothers in resistance. It's very important for us to listen her experience, her knowledge about forced and forced disappearance. And also we welcome Charlene Unger. She's also a member of the same collective. Her son, Carlos Antonio Arredondo Unger, was kidnapped by an armed commando on June 24th, 2019 in Guaymas, Sonora, on the coast of the Gulf of California. Both of them, they are still searching along with other mothers, wives, fathers, sons, and daughters for their relatives, and they are helping us to understand what's going on the ground. Doy la bienvenida entonces así a Cecilia Delgado
So
Grijalva,
welcome, Cecilia
fundadora
Delgado,
del colectivo Buscadoras por la Paz. Gracias, Cecilia, por aceptar esta
founder of
invitación.
the
Sabemos que
collective
ustedes se
Searching for
encuentran
Peace
ahora en una
Sonora.
brigada
Thank you, Cecilia, for
internacional en la
accepting this
frontera
invitation. We know that
Sonora,
right now you
Arizona,
are on an international
buscando
brigade
a personas
in the
desaparecidas. Te
border
agradecemos
between
mucho
Sonora and
tu
Arizona,
tiempo,
looking
tu
for disappeared
sabiduría y tu
persons.
palabra
We're
que
very
puedas
grateful for
compartir
your
el día de hoy.
presence and the words that you
Vamos
can
a
share with us today.
organizar nuestra
We're going
presentación
to
siguiendo
organize our
tres
presentation
ejes
according to
temáticos, tres
three
preguntas detonadoras, les
questions,
hemos llamado así,
three
para
orienting
poder conversar
questions,
contigo. Pero
so
si
that we
quieres
can
primero
speak with you. But
presentarte,
if you want to
Cecilia,
first introduce
te
yourself,
agradezco
Cecilia,
tu palabra.
I would be grateful for your words. Hi, good morning. Of course, my name is Charlene Unger. I belong to the group Searchers for Peace, and my son was disappeared in June 24th. His name is Jose. I'm a field searcher, and I'm here to speak with you, ready
Sí,
to
gracias,
listen.
Charlie. Una primera
Thank you,
pregunta que
Charlene.
quisiéramos
Maybe a
hacerte
first
para
question that we
comprender
would want to
mejor
ask you is to
su
understand better
búsqueda
your
es
search.
cómo tú
Is
nombrarías esta
how
violencia
would
que
you
implica
name
en tu
this
vida
violence
como
that
madre, como familia,
that
el
is in your
fenómeno de
life? How
esta
does it affect you
desaparición
as a
forzada de
mother?
tu hijo?
How,
¿Qué
the
problemas
disappearance of your son? What kind of
enfrentas?
problems have you
¿Cómo ha
confronted?
afectado
How
la
has it
vida de tu
affected
familia?
your family's life?
¿Cómo te
And
posiciona esta
how
nueva
does
realidad
it
en tu contexto local,
how
en tu
does this
comunidad?
new reality for you position you in your community and in your context? An occurrence like this totally
Sí, adelante.
turned your life upside down. It gives you a 180-degree turn of focus. It doesn't have a name because you don't know what they did to him, if he was tortured, if they threw him into the sea, if they buried him, where, why. And the violence right now, I can talk about the state of Sonora, which is where I am right now. The violence is at a crazy level. I say crazy because they're dissolving bodies with calcium. They're really destroying people. They're killing many people, disappearing many innocent people, many feminicides. They're killing many women with many different prototypes. These women are all young, lighter skin, long dark hair, really pretty young women. And it's an experience that I just had with a person from Obregón, Sonora. Her daughter was disappeared in 2019, and we were in touch, and she called me that she was going to try to find her here in Sinaloa. They found her in a hospital, but she was very thin and had renal failure, which means that they had taken her to prostitute her and to keep her drugged. And because she didn't serve them anymore, they dropped her off at the hospital, and the family went to find her. But it was in these last moments when she gave that information, she breathed her last breath. And so here, the rising up on women is daily. Right now in Sonora, we have an average of 10 to 12 disappeared, and then 10 to 15 executed daily. Every day. Every day. Every day, there are many confrontations between different cells, different violent groups, and they take out civilians in their wars. They kill people. And we're living an incredibly sad situation, very difficult, that requires many more years of educating and re-educating ourselves. But while we have this same culture of drug trafficking, our kids can't play freely anymore. This is what new generations, we have to send them this message that we have to change, we have to find peace, because thousands, hundreds of thousands, the numbers that they tell you here in Mexico aren't even half of what's real, what's true.
Grupos que están
So you're mentioning,
envueltos,
Charlie,
que son
groups
parte de
that
esta
are
violencia
part of this
contra
violence
personas en
against
desaparición forzada.
people
Entre
and
esos
who are
grupos, además de
forcibly
las mafias
disappearing people.
criminales,
Between these
y
groups, in
lo
addition
decía
to
la
criminal
doctora Mayek
mafias,
también,
as Mayek
están
said,
las trabas burocráticas
are also
de
like the
autoridades. ¿Cuál ha
bureaucratic
sido tu
difficulties.
experiencia
What has been your experience
para contar o no con el apoyo de autoridades
trying to search for
para la
support
búsqueda, para la
from
localización en
governments or
vida
from
o en
administrations
fosas?
to be able to find people either living or dead? So we have a state commission of searches. But really the work falls to us mothers. We need help. We have some help we need technical help. We need economic help. Sometimes we don't even have gas money, and sometimes we don't have water. We've never been hungry. We find some beans and we eat that with much pleasure, but our life is for searching. In the field, I search physically. When I'm doing that, I forget my own health problems. I forget my own anxiety. It's my ambition. This is what my son left me. My son was cowardly taken for no reason. Like many others, there's no reason for anyone to be taken. And nobody has the right to do this. But unfortunately, drugs right now are making people lose their sense. Hitmen are just drugged. And so there's a lot of recruitment among young people to different groups. They kidnap young people, especially people who come from dysfunctional homes. They offer them support and supposedly weapons so that they feel untouchable. And that's how it starts with young people. It's a whole network. So this increases every day. I don't see a stopping point. Those of us in the brigade have had a lot of support from authorities at 3 levels of government: municipal, state, and national. But those of us who do the real hard work are we, the mothers. And that's, truly I feel proud to say that I am a searching mother. And I just need a shovel, a pickup truck. That's it. Maybe a little bit of money for gas so that we can move. I mean, there's not government support for that. But truly, I think that nobody can search for our disappeared people better than we can. And that's something that I prove when we find people. 90% of our cases, Cecilia won't let me lie. We really have to.
Sí.
We process
Charlene,
everything in the
gracias.
grades that we find.
Estamos
90%
también
of it, the
ahora con
last fingernail
Cecilia,
we
estamos
identify.
conversando. Bienvenida,
So
Cecilia,
with
gracias
you
por
and with
darte
Cecilia,
tiempo
hi, I see you now.
en
Thank you
medio
for
de
giving us
esta
this time
brigada que están
in the
ustedes
midst of the brigade
llevando a
that you
cabo
two
en
are
Sonora.
realizing right
Y
now
le
in
han
Sonora.
llamado Brigada
And you've called
Internacional.
it an
La doctora
international
Maya Querales nos hablaba
brigade.
de
And
lo
Maya
transnacional,
talked
que
to
es
us
el
of how
fenómeno, pero también la
transnational this
búsqueda.
phenomenon
¿Nos
is
podrías
and how
platicar,
the search is.
Cecilia, por
Could you talk
qué,
to
cómo están
Cecilia a little bit
organizadas
about
ahora en
how
esta
you're
brigada
organized right
y
now in
por
this
qué le llaman
brigade?
transnacional?
And why do you call
¿Qué es
it
lo que están
transnational?
buscando? ¿Qué
What
es
are
lo que están
you searching
encontrando?
for? What are you finding?
Bienvenida, Cecilia.
Welcome, Cecilia. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. This brigade is called an international brigade because people come from other countries. We saw a real need that so many mothers have who are just like us, that their sons have disappeared. Then they don't know anything about their sons. So every mother, every father who writes to our Facebook page wondering where their kids are, not knowing what to do, knowing that they're so far away, like we at least live in the state where our son disappeared. And they know we realized today everything that they have to do to be able to come. And many people were not able to come. They weren't able to get a visa. They can't come to Mexico. They can't travel freely. But we were able to have some families come, but many more families stayed in their places waiting because they couldn't travel. And so that's why we call it an international brigade, where people come from different countries like Colombia, Peru, El Salvador, Honduras, Italy. People are coming from there to accompany us and to search for their disappeared family members. And in our hopelessness, we wanted to do it that way so that they could have the opportunity to come and feel a little bit better, maybe better in quotes, to be a little bit closer to their family members. I know they return brokenhearted. It's not easy. It's not easy to find my son. It was so hard. It was like 800 days I was looking for him. And every day I was actively looking. And so it wasn't the first search when I found it. It's not the first time you try that you're able to find your family member. We know that it's not like that, but at least they can have with them an experience and they know how to come back more easily. And so for the second brigade, we're going to have more brigades. It'll be easier for them to come to the country, and for people who are still in their countries looking for their family members, it'll be easier for them to come too. So I'm very satisfied to have achieved this brigade. It was not easy and it's just exhausting, but I feel really satisfied of having been able to do a little bit or maybe a lot that
Dado
we've been
que
able to do right
Sonora
now.
es un estado
So
fronterizo con
given that
Arizona,
Sonora is a border
¿tienen
state
ustedes
with
allí
Arizona,
alguna eco,
do you have
colaboración con
any
algunos colectivos
echoes or any collaboration with
solidaridad de
any
parte del lado
solidarity
de Arizona?
collectives in
¿Hay
Arizona?
comunicación, hay
Is there
apoyo?
communication at all or support? So we have a collective from the US that's called, didn't catch it, but they don't live in Arizona. So, yeah, it's been difficult. I don't remember. I think there's another one from California, but it's hard for them. I really would like to find somebody who's on the other side here in Arizona from Tucson, that area, so that they can also look in those places. I've been able to, with the help of God and help of some authorities, to be able to communicate in the US. People who are lost in the desert, they've been found with life. And so we've been able to communicate a little bit about those cases, but I would really love for a collective from those places that we could coordinate with them to save more lives, because many people in Sonora, when we find them, they're close to death. I don't want to
Sí,
lose more
invito
lives
a
in
los
search of the
colegas que
American
quieran
dream.
hacer alguna pregunta a
So I'm going to
Cecilia o a
invite people
Charlene,
who are
ellas como
here to ask
buscadoras en
questions if
esta
they have any
brigada
questions
y
for
este
Cecilia
colectivo por la
or
paz
Charlene,
sonora, a que pongan en el chat sus
that you can
preguntas y
write
así
some
podemos
questions in the chat as
seguir la
they come
conversación.
to you, so that we can continue
En
this
lo que eso
conversation.
sucede, yo quisiera
So while
retomar
people are
el
doing
tema
that, I do want to take up this
ustedes
topic.
se nombran a sí mismas no
You guys
víctimas, bien lo
call
señalaba
yourselves, you don't
Maya
call
Perales, sino
yourselves
buscadoras,
victims,
y
following up on what
lo
Maya
subrayaba
was
Charlene
explaining.
también.
You call yourselves
¿Qué
searchers.
significa eso?
What
No,
does
no
that
dejarse
mean for you?
atrapar
Not
por
letting
las
yourself
narrativas
be trapped by
oficiales,
the
es
official
algo que a
narratives
ustedes les
is something that
empodera cuando están
empowers
juntas. ¿Cómo
you when you're together.
describirían,
How
cómo
can
nos
you
contarían su
describe, or how would
experiencia
you
de
tell
estar
us about your
juntas,
experience
sobre
of
todo
being
madres buscando
together,
a sus
mothers more
hijas
than
e
anything,
hijos?
looking for your daughters and sons? I think that it's something that I think being together, our pain is what unites us. The strong pain, not just anybody understands us. Lots of people don't understand that our principal goal is to find our disappeared family members. And we always talk about this. We're talking about it all the time. And among us, the hopelessness or the franticness that we feel to find them, I think that being together, all of the collectives and all of those of us who are in those collectives, being together and searching for our family members with the love that we have for them, I think that's the key, the love that we have for our family members, because we confront the climate of Sonora is terrible. It's above 50 degrees Celsius. And it's not that it's not important for us. Of course, we feel the heat, but the love that we have for our children is greater than any heat or any cold, any hunger, any of the animals, the snakes that we come across. We're here. That's what most moves us. We look with our hearts. And that's something that other people can't do. Authorities just, they can't search how we do with our hearts. And I think that's what helps us so much.
Un colega de aquí de Boston, el profesor Ernesto Valiente,
And
pregunta
so
si
a
ustedes
professor
tienen
here
el
from
apoyo
Boston
de
College,
ONGs
Neto,
o de
asked if
iglesias
you
en su
have
búsqueda.
support
¿Han
from
encontrado esa
NGOs or churches in your search.
solidaridad
Have
por
you found that
ejemplo,
solidarity
grupos
at all? I
civiles
don't
o
know,
de
civil
iglesias?
groups or church groups? Yeah, churches in other states, there is some support from churches. And I was talking to one of my companions. It seems like churches have really helped them. And so we haven't really approached churches. Yesterday, I think it was yesterday, there was a priest who came up to us and he was talking and he gave us some food. He let us stay in his place and he was made himself really available to us. And he really encouraged us with his words. That's the first time since I became a searching
Hay
mother.
que
But
recordar tal vez para los compañeros,
and I have
compañeras,
to
que
remind
por
maybe our
ejemplo, en México hay
companions
más
that
de
in
100
Mexico
colectivos y
there's more
colectivas,
than 100
de madres, de
collectives
padres, de
of
familiares buscando a sus hijas e
family
hijos.
members looking for their
Y cada
children.
año organizan
And
alguna brigada
every year
nacional o
they
regional,
organize some sort of
están
regional or
activas siempre
national
estas
brigade.
colectivas. Y hay un eje de iglesias, que se le
And
llama
there's
así,
a
que es
group of
ecuménico,
churches that's an
donde se
ecumenical group
acompaña la
that
búsqueda también
accompanies
con
the search
una
also
dimensión como espiritual, la
with like
oración
a
antes de empezar la
spiritual
búsqueda de fosas clandestinas, o cuando se encuentra, se
element.
hace
They
un
like help do a
hallazgo,
prayer
hacer
before
un
we go out to
ritual
search, do
para
a small
reconocer y
ritual
honrar,
to
por
recognize and
ejemplo,
honor,
esos restos humanos y
for
a la
example,
persona y a
the
la
human
familia que les
remains and the
busca.
person and the family
Entonces
who is
es un
searching.
proceso que puede ayudar
So it's
a
that's a
fortalecer
process
la
that
comunidad.
helps strengthen
En
the
ese
community.
sentido, otra vez con
In
Charlie y
that
Cecilia,
sense, again
ustedes
with
hablan de que
Charlene
el
and
amor es lo que
Cecilia,
las
you
mueve.
guys talk about
¿Qué es lo que
love
les
is
ayuda a
what
resistir?
moves you. What
¿Cómo
helps you
describirían ustedes,
resist?
cómo
How would
nos
you
contarían cuál
describe
es
or
su
how would you tell us
espiritualidad que las
what is your
anima?
spirituality? What is the
¿Qué es lo
spirituality
que
that
las mueve? El amor, por
moves
supuesto,
you?
a sus
This
hijas,
love, of
hijos.
course, for your children.
Pero ¿hay
But
algo más que nos
is
puedan
there
contar sobre
anything
esa
else you can
fuerza
tell
que les
us
anima?
about that force that animates you?
Charlie,
Mucho coraje. Mucho coraje, no contra nada.
Coraje.
Contra nadie.
Courage.
Es un coraje que sale del alma por sacar esos cuerpos.
Coraje is like anger and courage mixed together. Because we know that, like indignation. We know that these bodies aren't supposed to be in the graves. And so personally, for me, I can't speak to others, but I feel God walking by my side.
Mis compañeras que
And
me levantan cuando me caigo.
I feel God in my companions that lift me up when I fall. This is my second family. This is the strength that we have to be walking in the land and knowing that people are buried there, but that we can't see them, but we know that they're there.
Quisiéramos tener uñas de fierro, les juro, para sacarlos de ahí, ¿no? Porque
we wish we could see in the dark, kind of, to be able to get them out. They don't deserve this. They don't deserve to be in these graves. And so this gives us strength. And seeing how many mothers, when we fall apart, I mean, I've fallen apart. Cecilia falls apart. It's so much pressure that we carry. But I think love is stronger. This love that we have for our disappeared family members.
Claro, por nuestros hijos es el que tenemos las madres. No tiene
Of
nombre.
course, this is something that mothers have. This pain doesn't have a name.
Perdón, coloquialmente hablando, locura.
The sound is cutting out quite a bit here.
Despiertas que van a llegar, pero luego te cae el marrazo de la triste realidad que eso puede ser uno en un millón o dos en un millón. Pero yo en mi corazón siento que mi hijo no está ya. Pero yo voy a seguir hasta que, aunque no
I will
encuentre a él,
continue, even if I don't find my son, I'll continue, because each
que encontramos, porque no
each one that we find, not just me, not that I find, but that we find, that the collective finds, and I feel so proud of our collective. Each person that we find is a recovery of a piece of ourselves. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like it gives you a little light in the darkness that we live in.
Estamos en un mundo oscuro. Es como que una pequeña...
Because we are living in a dark world, but it's like a small light in our hearts. It's so difficult to talk about or to explain, but we live in a dark world. And so every human being that we find gives us a little bit of light. At least for me. On a muy personal level. And I think Cecilia too, she's such a strong woman. She found her son and she continues working for others. And I'm here I support the best I can, but really Cecilia is a pillar of our collective. Cecilia is a pillar of our collective, and I just feel so grateful and so proud.
Cecilia, dado lo que decía Charlie,
hasta donde podamos llegar, vamos a llegar.
Tú encontraste a tu hijo luego de 2 años. Eso
Cecilia, you found your son after
transformó sin
2
duda tu
years.
búsqueda,
I'm sure
pero al
that
mismo tiempo
transformed
te
your
ha
search.
dado
But at the same time, has
nueva
it
fuerza.
given
¿Y
you
por qué sigues
new
buscando con
strength? And why
otras
do you
madres?
continue
¿Nos puedes
searching
contar
with other
ese
mothers? Can you tell
proceso?
us
Y
a
luego
little bit about that
invitaría a
process?
Mira y a Mariana
And
que
I'd
de viva
also
voz digan
invite
sus preguntas
Amira and
después
Mariana
de
that
lo
they
que
can
nos
say their
comente
questions
Cecilia,
after
porque somos un
Cecilia
grupo más
speaks to
pequeño y
us,
podemos
because we're a
escucharnos
smaller group. I
también
think we
mutuamente.
can
Cecilia,
speak to each other.
cuéntanos.
So Cecilia, so 13 months ago, I found my son. And I also have a nephew who's disappeared. In 2020, he disappeared. He was disappeared. But I continue in this struggle, not just for my nephew. I continue because promises are fulfilled. I promised my son that I would find him, and I didn't know if I would find him. I didn't know if I'd be able to find him. Because it's like finding a leaf in the wind. But my son, I knew that I wouldn't stop looking for him until I found him. And maybe he wouldn't be alive, but I would find him. And when I found him, I made another promise. I told him that I was going to help. Sorry, I'm a crier. That was Cecilia. I'm going to help all the mothers that I can who are in a similar struggle. It's a relative kind of peace. It helps me so much. This is my therapy to be here. And I promised him that I was going to struggle for other people until God stops giving me permission to be here. Because I know it's not easy, but I know what mothers feel when they don't have their son. I know, like Chadleen, she's my sister. And I told her that I would be with her until we find her son. And just like that, with each one of the mothers of us, that we all have the same piece that's missing from our hearts, the same hole that we have. And that's why I continue to be here. I haven't had a single day of rest since my son left. I found him, and I haven't had time really to grieve because I'm still out here in the field. This is my therapy. Without this, I think I would be even crazier than I already am. The pain, it's terrible to find your child and to find him in these conditions. I think it marks us for the rest of our lives. And so I'm here, and I'll be here as long as God allows me to, struggling for others and giving relative peace to these mothers who are struggling too, and for others who aren't searching, because each one of us has different options. Some people, we end up in bed depressed. Some of us go out and search, and as I said at the beginning, promises are fulfilled. I found my son, and I'm going to continue
Gracias,
as long as God
Cecilia.
gives me permission.
Mariana, ¿tienes posibilidad de
Mariana,
tú misma
are you able
abrir tu audio y
to open your
hacer
audio
tu pregunta muy
and ask
interesante
your
desde tu
interesting
experiencia
question
también?
here? Thank you, Cecilia and Chadleen, for participating. I really recognize your strength. I think that personally, what I'm really drawn to here has to do with how it's women who are the protagonists of this search, and women are the ones who, because of the statistics and women who are in charge of family dynamics and care, economies of care. So when you say that you will go all day to search for this therapy, as you say, how do you deal with the care responsibilities if you have grandchildren that you're caring for? How do you deal with your home responsibilities if you care for others? How do you deal with that? I personally, my youngest child is 23. So he doesn't need his mother all the time. And so if he complains, I say to him, sometimes he says, "You're not even here at home." And I think that happens. Sometimes we abandon our families. I haven't been working. I couldn't focus on anything to work. I think that it's very difficult. It's very difficult. I have 3 grandchildren. The smallest granddaughter is 6, and she says, "Grandma, you never call me." She lives in Mexico, the center of Mexico. And one loses, because we're so focused on this and on the work of searching. If I already lost my son, I do say to myself, I'm losing my family little by little too. It's I have another daughter who lives in the US. I mean, we used to be such a united family. My son was with us, and then all of a sudden I feel so alone. So alone. Because I have my 2 sons, but really we're not together. We're not together because of this whole situation. Because at first I wanted to find my son, and now because I'm pursuing this, my therapy, my daughter went to Phoenix and my son lives at home, as I said, but we only see each other for very small periods of time. It's such a difficult experience. I know other women return to their homes after searching, or maybe they go home 1 or 2 days, but I'm busy all the days. I go to the genetic laboratory, I go to the Attorney General, I go searching. All week, every week I'm busy. And this is who I am. And this is what keeps me alive.
Gracias, Cecilia. Charlene, ¿quisieras
Thank you,
comentar
Cecilia.
algo
Charlene, would
sobre
you
este
like
tema
to
de
say anything
la
about this topic
infancia,
of
los cuidados de tus nietos,
children,
nietas o
care,
otros
your
miembros de la
grandchildren,
familia?
or
¿Cómo
other members
afecta
of your
toda
family?
esta
How does
experiencia?
this experience affect them? So my children are grown. They're older than Cecilia's children. They have their lives, but only one of them really lives close to me. He studies criminology, and he's involved in these searches as well. But my my grandchildren, yeah, that really affects me. Sometimes we call each other, but the family life is just broken. It's such an emptiness. It's difficult to understand a mother who has a missing child. It's not that you don't love the others. We just can't deal with our own pain and our own craziness. And so we end up losing our families. But we have hope that our work is not in vain. I mean, if we don't do it, who will do it? If we don't teach new generations to care about other people, what are we doing? Who's going to do it? Nobody. If we have to sacrifice our families, it's a self-sacrifice, and we're sacrificing the others as well. But we have to set a precedent that this is possible. That we have to search. We need hands. We need eyes. We need tools. We need so many things. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. But the people that we're able to find with that, I think it's important. And our kids have to, at some point when we're not here anymore, maybe our grandchildren, they have to have this different way of thinking and this different kind of culture. So if we can save 2 or 3 people from our family, I think that for me, I think that's a reward, even if I don't find my son.
Gracias, Charlene.
Thank you,
Mayek
Charlene.
quería
Mayek,
comentar también
did you want to
algo.
have a comment here?
Adelante, Mayek.
Go ahead, Mayek. Yeah, I'd really like to hold Cecilia and Charlene and send them some care for what they're sharing, sharing their emotions, and at the same time share with you that these kinds of feelings that each of the mothers has, for them, the collectives are like a new support network. Some recognize their companions as a new family. Some people call themselves warriors. Many people use the word female warriors. It's part of the name of their collectives. And this way that they describe in such a caring way the people that they find on their journeys. At the beginning of the presentation, Carlos mentioned that they recover treasures, and that's something that has been shared. It's a symbolic capital that has been shared among different searchers, because even the way that they treat the bodies when they're found, the forensic, between the mothers and the forensic technicians, it's different. The way they find and recover and locate the bodies, the forensic technicians are more detached. They don't see it as their family member. And the searchers have this sentimental relationship. And one power that they have is that they all look for everyone. And so right now, our friends who are sharing their feelings of their family life with their blood family, they've also been building this symbolic family outwards with other searchers and other disappeared people. And this is something important in terms of Latin America. This has happened in Chile, in Colombia, how these women realize that the disappeared people are orphans of society. When they aren't searched for, when nobody's paying attention, they become orphans. So these women adopt the disappeared people that they're looking for, and that's why they call them treasures, and they treat them with so much affection. And there are some journalists who are really able to document this, the care with which they go out to the land and do their field work, the insistence that these women have of continuing to search. And so I just want to hold
esa
both of them
política
and
de
send
los
them a
afectos
love.
que también es tan importante
This
recuperar
is
con
such an
su fuerza
important recovery of
de
affection
remembrar una comunidad
and of
herida y de
remembering,
remembrar también un
recomposing a
cuerpo
beloved
social
community and a
lastimado
social
y
body that
cómo
has been
emociones,
broken,
afectos tienen un
and how all
significado
of these
social,
effects have a
político, y
social
aquí agregaríamos
implication.
en eso consiste lo
And
espiritual,
I would say that the
en una
spiritual piece
dimensión
is
de
part of that too,
remembrar lo
as far
desmembrado,
as
en una dimensión de
recomposing
volver
the
a ser un
decomposed,
cuerpo unido
remembering a
con quienes
body,
nos faltan.
remembering a
Entonces,
united
esta
body, forming
dimensión
part of the united body.
teológica es la que
So
nosotros en
this
este colectivo
theological
desde Boston
dimension is
College
maybe
queremos
what
también
those of us here at BC would
explorar con ustedes,
want to
apoyar,
explore with you
por
and
ejemplo, a
support.
través del eje de iglesias, como su
For
búsqueda,
example, from
ustedes,
the
Charlene,
churches that
Cecilia y
accompany
todas las
you,
buscadoras, nos enseñan otro tipo de
how you teach
espiritualidad
us a different kind
que
of
surge, como
spirituality
Charlene decía, con una
that comes
fuerza
about, as
impresionante
Charlene
del
says, with
el
such
enojo,
force,
la
but the
indignación,
anger, the
el
indignation,
coraje por lo que
the
están enfrentando, pero al mismo tiempo el
rage
amor que las
that you
mueve.
search with, but also the
Entonces
love that
queremos
moves you.
aprender de ustedes.
And so we want to learn from
Y
you.
aquí dos preguntas
Here
que
there are
están
two
en el
other
chat.
questions that are in the
Nemo
chat.
Castelli, buen
We have
compañero, amigo jesuita que ahora está
Nemo
desde
Castelli,
Irlanda
a
escuchándonos.
Jesuit
Dice,
companion,
gracias por el cariño con
says,
que
thank
nos
you
han
for the
abierto su
affection with
corazón
which you
y
have
su historia
opened your heart and your
en medio de lo
stories.
que han vivido.
In the midst of what
Y
you
les
have
pregunta,
lived,
¿cómo ha cambiado su relación
how
con
has
Dios?
your relationship with
¿Qué
God
les dice
changed?
Dios si es que
What
experimentan
does
que
God
les dice
say to
algo?
you if you have experienced that God says
¿Quisieran
anything?
decir,
Would you
sentir
like
su
to
pensar,
say
Charlene?
anything,
Cecilia.
Charlene? Yes, of course. I'd like to say that at the beginning, yeah, my thinking has changed. At the beginning, I was so angry with God. I was so angry. And I said to God, why? Why my son? Why him? Why have you taken him from me? I blamed God for everything. But little by little, I understood that the hand of men is not the fault of God. It's not God's fault how much extreme evil there is. And so I've changed my way of thinking as time has gone on. And little by little, I've been able to reconcile myself with God because, I was extremely angry. But now, little by little, I've been able to find reconciliation. And I hope that little by little, God gives me the peace that I need, little by little. And to keep going because there's no other option. To keep going with this pain that is in my soul, to continue struggling. I will continue struggling so that I get rid of this rage that I have. That's my feeling.
Gracias, Cecilia. Charlene, ¿quisieras decir algo sobre
Charlene, would
esta
you like to say
pregunta
anything about that
del
question
compañero jesuita Nemo Castelli
from Nemo's question?
sobre cómo ha cambiado su relación con Dios esta experiencia?
No, pues aquí anda conmigo.
Yeah, God's here with me.
Aquí anda conmigo, no me suelta.
God's walking along here with me. That's fine. Every step that I take, God doesn't leave me. I was never very religious. I wasn't very much about God. I believed in God, but but if it weren't for God, who knows if I would be here. God has raised me here and has made me feel his presence in ways that maybe make me feel crazy, but I really was a person who wasn't very religious, but now I say that God is my best friend, my pillar. And I know that my son is in God's arms. And all of the disappeared, who for me are martyrs. I think they're martyrs. They're in God's arms. And God's here with me as I search. There have been many stumbles. God has cared for us in a really impressive way.
Wow. Gracias, Charlene, por
Thank you,
esa
Charlene,
contundencia con la que nos hablas de
for
tu
this
experiencia, además.
decisiveness with which you speak
Sí,
of your
sí, se
experience.
cortaba, sí.
Sorry, I'm back. So for me, God, I'm in love. I'm in love with Jesus, with divinity, with my mother, Maria, Mary. I'm in love. That's what my son left to me. That's what my son left to me, to fall in love with God. I don't think there's anything more I can say. I don't know if you can see on this screen the beautiful land that I'm on here that is planted with so many souls. I'm going to try to turn the camera around so that you can see the extension of this land where there could be hundreds and hundreds of bodies. 1 second, let me try to do this.
Ahora estamos viendo el desierto.
Yeah, we see the desert.
Esto es infinito.
Con
It's
ese
infinite.
paisaje que nos muestras, que es un paisaje desértico, pero al mismo tiempo
this country that you
la
show us,
posibilidad
this
de las
land that you
cosas.
show us,
Una
it's
compañera que está en
a
Chicago,
desert,
Mira, pregunta, ¿nos
but
pueden
also
explicar un
potentially
poco del
full
lugar en donde están
of bodies.
buscando?
In
¿Cuáles
fact,
son las
Amira,
condiciones?
a
¿Por qué
companion
buscan
here from
allí en
Chicago,
particular?
is
Querían
asking
comentarnos por qué
for
la
you to say
brigada
a
se
little bit more
concentró
about
en
why
esta
you're
zona
there
de
in particular.
Sonora.
Why are you exactly where you are? Cecilia, can you answer that? We're concentrating on the border area because we're searching for immigrants who are lost on the way. So we're concentrating our search along the border. And so that's why we're focused there. And we know that we're not going to find our family members here who are disappeared for other reasons, but we're searching for migrants here. And so we'll continue along the border until we get to
Gracias,
Tijuana.
Cecilia. Carmen Margarita había
Thank you,
levantado su mano,
Cecilia. Carmen
puertorriqueña,
Margarita, a friend from
que
Puerto
está en
Rico,
Ottawa, si no me equivoco.
who
Carmen
is in
Margarita,
Ottawa,
si
I think. Carmen
quieres
Margarita, if you'd like to express
comentarios,
your
adelante.
comments, go ahead.
Primero,
So, yeah, first of all, thank you so much for everything you've shared with us, Charlene, Cecilia, Mayek. I feel like we are in this moment on holy ground together. I feel your voices and I hear God saying, take off your sandals. When I see the desert, I see you and I hear you. I feel this so much that I took off my shoes because I'm seeing a really profound experience of holiness. So starting from there, you guys mentioned the conversion. You mentioned conversion. We have been converted to. This is a conversion means we've become searchers. This is a deep interior change. So Cecilia and Charlene, I'm sure that Mexican society, which I still feel part of even though I'm living in Ottawa, we have to convert too. And so in that sense, you guys are on the avant-garde of this message of the need for conversion. What is it that we need to become? What do we need to convert into in order to walk with you all? That's a question. And the second is, I'm sure that you guys are not forensic technicians. I'm sure that you didn't have such specific knowledge about how to search for bodies. How did you own knowledges that are confined sometimes within structures? How did you make those knowledges your own to be able to search? Thank you.
Cecilia, Charlene.
Well, I think first it's true. As a society, we have to change this, our chip in our brains, from saying that people were disappeared because they were connected to drug trafficking, or that they were selling, or they were a drug user. We have to change these kinds of questions, these kinds of assumptions. I think that as a society, and I'm speaking in general because I was part of that, I never even imagined that I would have my son disappeared. I don't know. I was very outside of this. It was something that maybe in my worst nightmares would occur to me. And I still see the apathy of so many people. So many people who, and I'm telling you, truly, they make faces at us like as if we were, like, you're not part of society. Like, they separate us. And I can say this because we've asked for society to cooperate with us. We've received really bad treatment, really strong opposition that like also makes us indignant. I'm not going to tell you that I don't get mad. I do get mad. People say, why do I have to help you? Well, why do you have a disappeared son? Well, I'm very grateful to God that your family is complete, but it's not that just part of our society is exposed or vulnerable to this. Nobody is exempt from this risk. I hope it doesn't happen, but I'd like to change that about society, that we not judge others, that people join our struggle. It doesn't matter if you don't know anything. We're here to struggle with the resources that we have. We do struggle. You know, I gave everything I had to this struggle. I don't regret it. I would do it a million times over. And the Bible says that money is only for protection. Money doesn't buy happiness. I would prefer to live under a tree, but with my family all together. But unfortunately, that's not it. Money doesn't help us very much for that. Money is just helpful for resources. But many families are all together. And as we said, we were so happy, and we didn't know how happy we were because we had our family together. And we didn't appreciate it maybe, but I always had such a united, beautiful family, and it affected all of us. And so I do hope that people change. I hope people change their attitudes towards us, towards the mothers and sisters and wives that are searching, and that they become part of our search, that they don't judge us and they don't re-victimize us. That's what we need, is a hand on our shoulder saying that we're with you. That's what we need. And the other thing is, you can see my hands full of blisters, full of calluses. I never thought I would pick up a shovel. I didn't even know how to use a shovel. And I was like, what? How am I going to look for someone? It was impossible for me. It was something really tremendous. But I wanted to find my son. I didn't want to find him this way. I didn't want to find him in the way that I found him. But I knew that if I didn't go look for him, because I looked for him to be alive and I looked for him in the field, but if I didn't go try to find him, nobody was going to do it for me. Nobody. So I decided to look for him night and day until I found him. And I didn't know how to start that, what to do, how to dig, how to unearth a grave. But you learn out of love. You learn and you lift these remains out with so much love. When I find a body, I talk to it. I say, you're going to be in a dignified place soon. You're going home soon. You're going to be together with your family soon. And I speak to them a little bit, because I know that they're not going to be in this place, such horrible place anymore. And it's just so hard to see them and to do this. I've seen over 300 bodies. We've found over 300, and every time it's with such a tremendous pain. And I hope that God gives me the opportunity to bring so many more people home. I mean, at this point, I know the difference between the smell of a dog and the smell of a person. You learn so many things, and you learn it out of necessity. For this love that you have to find your loved one, that's what moves us. That's what's moved all of us to. Well, I don't know how to. We're not forensic technicians, nothing, but we've learned so much, especially through different workshops that we've been given. But I think our field work is what teaches us and what helps us learn more.
Charlene, ¿quieres comentar algo de lo
Charlene,
que
do you have anything to comment here of what Carmen Margarita asked?
Yo se han perdido mucho los valores.
I've learned a lot about values.
Los valores por las diferentes situaciones que se viven, por violencia, por la
I've learned about different situations that people lived in.
Eso ha afectado mucho a la juventud.
Young people are so affected. Drugs, of course, is a huge business. And human beings have no limit for this kind of stuff. I think that I've always said, in the world, there's never been a person who has power but who kept his feet on the ground more than Jesus. Any person who gets a little bit of power, that's when their ego goes off. That always happens. So values of humility, of love, this is what we have to communicate to new generations. Because without values, there were rules at the beginning, but like where we are right now, we can't follow the norms. We can't follow the rules. The wind moves the sand, and we can't follow the best practices. And And so you just have to follow your heart, which is what guides us to find. And we don't give up. I also didn't know how to use a pickaxe or a shovel or how to get on the ground and try to find bodies in pieces. Sometimes bodies with flesh, with intestines, with livers, and to have to pick them up with your hands because you can't use the shovel because they're so delicate. And that for me has been a really strong experience, but that's where I realized how strong love is. It gives you the strength to pick a body up, a person up with your hands, bone by bone among flesh and mud, with a really strong stench. The odor that comes out of the graves makes your stomach turn. We don't feel it anymore. This smell never leaves your memory or your nose, but it's such a satisfaction to return these remains to where they belong. And so here that we don't have techniques for searching. There's instructions about how to do this stuff, but in the desert, everything's the same. Nothing changes. So I've learned a lot from Cecilia. I've learned a lot from myself. I observe. I'm the slowest. I'm the oldest. I see myself walking beneath the trees. I go wherever I want to. And I think that if you feel like there's something there, sometimes I go everywhere I think that there could be something. Sometimes we find one body, two bodies, sometimes nothing. There's tunnels that Chapo Guzman has made, and I walk through them just to make sure.
Charlene, por esta descripción tan
Thank you,
viva,
Charlene, for
personal
this
de tu
really
experiencia
alive and personal
aprendiendo
description of your
a
experience.
rascar con tus
Learning
propias manos la tierra
of touching the earth with your
para
own
encontrar
hands
los
to
restos
find
humanos y los signos de la
human
vida, los
remains and
tesoros
signs of life, these
de
treasures
hijos e hijas.
of
Mayek ha levantado la mano,
children.
quería
Mayek, you had your
comentar
hand
también
up. Did you
algo y
want to
quizás
say
después vamos a
something
hacer
too?
una
And
última
maybe we'll
participación
do
como
a
para ir
final
cerrando la
moment
conversación.
here to close our
Mayek, por
conversation.
favor.
Mayek, please. Yeah, I really think that Charlene said a lot of what I wanted to share, because you guys are come together around this idea of have decolonized the forensic science field quite a bit. They didn't really get recognition for it since 2014, but the feminicides and the disappearances in Mexico and in Latin America, these families developed their own capacities, a contextual analysis that implies understanding what actors are positioned in a territory, which actors might have interest in disappearing a person, along what routes are people taken. And so sometimes forensic science in Mexico, which is really not a well-supported field, doesn't know how to do that kind of analysis. So when Charlene showed us the scene, the terrain that she's in, it reminded me another searcher who explained to me how their starting point is remembering that perpetrators are human beings too, who are in a desert. So their starting point for looking is, where is their shade? Because that's where somebody can work without suffering the high temperatures and the sun so much that our companions were describing to you. So this collective in Coahuila this insight has allowed them to find bodies, looking for these really tall, shady trees, because that's where perpetrators can more easily work. Or other people also in abandoned ways look for, where do the paths go? People aren't going to make the work harder for themselves. Like, they've been able to really assume the point of view of the perpetrator. They really humanize the perpetrator and put them in their space. Because what often happens is that we turn them into monsters, and that prevents us from understanding them. They're monsters, they're crazy, who knows what's happening in their head. But this logic that the searchers have of humanizing the perpetrators helps them find people. In Chihuahua, another borderland, in the context of feminicides, what the mothers who were looking for their daughters did was to go to the military. Yeah, where military people are known for having their rendezvous. And so that's exactly where a grave was found eventually. So the searchers have really developed this capacity to understand how a person who works as an assassin works and where they might be. These lands are usually hot places, conflicted places, and these searchers are able to negotiate with the assassins, so they're able to go to the places and search. So speaking to them as human beings, that's something that the authorities can't always achieve. They have phrases that have this kind of power. And so this topic of decolonizing the search, Cecilia and Charlene said it very clearly. I just wanted to echo what they said.
Muchas gracias, Mayek.
Thank
Quisiera
you,
pedirle a Nemo
Mayek. I just wanted to
Castelli,
ask
¿quieres decir algo de
Nemo,
lo que has escrito?
did you want to
Como
say
para
something
ir
about what
cerrando
you've
un poquito esta
written
conversación
there, just
y
so that we
luego
can
hacerles una
close
última
this
pregunta a las
session,
compañeras.
and then I'll have one final question for the companions.
Sí, coincide con lo que Carmen Margarita decía también.
Son dos cosas. Uno lo quisiera dejar de.
There's two things that
Disculpe, porque también
I'm sorry,
me conecto mucho con lo que ha pasado en mi patria, en parte de mi familia.
I'm thinking a lot about what's happened in my country to part of my family. I have an uncle who was found in a grave. He was disappeared during the Pinochet dictatorship. And so I just want to thank you for the generosity with which Charlene and Cecilia have shared their hearts and their holy land. It really makes us be barefoot in front of the mystery of life. And I don't know, Carlos, what exactly you were inviting me to say, but I just really am identifying with what Mayek said about a reflection from some companions of mine. I'm really reflecting on this about seeing the perpetrator as a human being and not as a monster, because when we see them as a monster, this seems really illuminating to me. When we humanize them, we can understand them and learn how to search. I mean, that just seems so powerful. Something even more sinister is that the people who do this is someone who could be, I mean, when we humanize these people, we realize that it could be somebody that we know. It's not easy to identify. So humanly and religiously, this is such a, I mean, how are we capable of doing things that hurt others so much? I'm so impressed by how these mothers have had to try to understand the logic of people who have disappeared these bodies in order to find the bodies. I mean, we human beings are so, yeah, if evil doesn't have, if evil is so everyday, as Hannah Arendt said, then we're so much more susceptible to it.
Sí, sí,
I don't know if that's what
sí,
you meant,
claro.
Carlos, but that's what I'm
Tenemos una
thinking
serie de
about.
preguntas que nos regresan desde la experiencia de las
Yes, this is a
buscadoras
series of
y
questions
que es
that
humanizar
resound
la
with us out
búsqueda
of
y es
the
un modo,
experience of
y
these
lo han hecho
searchers.
desde muchas familias de desaparecidos,
And there are
desde
so many family
Chile,
members
Argentina,
from Chile,
Brasil,
Argentina,
Colombia, ahora
Brazil,
México,
Colombia,
hace
Mexico
décadas.
now, for
Un saber
decades.
que se construye desde
This
abajo,
knowledge
desde el
that
reverso
is
de la historia,
constructed from
desde
below, from the other
los
side
no
of history,
lugares,
from the
¿verdad?
non-places.
Y gracias a ustedes,
And
Cecilia,
it's thanks to
Charlene,
you,
por
Cecilia
su
and
palabra.
Charlene, for your
Nada más
words.
cerrar con una última
I
pregunta de
just
la
want to
profesora Mary Ann en
close
Boston
with a
College, que
final
ella
question
pregunta
from
que si
Marianne
habrá
from
una
Boston
segunda
College.
brigada
That
internacional,
will there be a
dónde tendrá
second
lugar,
brigade? Where will
en
it
qué país o
be?
cómo se
What
pueden tejer
country? Or
redes
how can we
internacionales precisamente en esta
weave
búsqueda.
international networks
Quisieran
and
comentar algo de lo
communication
que sigue.
channels about
Ahorita están,
this
por supuesto,
search? I
en
don't know if you have
Sonora.
anything to say. I know you're right now in
Sí,
Sonora,
Cecilia,
but
Charlene.
Cecilia, Charlene.
Sí, adelante.
A Charly no le quedaron muchas ganas, pero sí va a haber continuación de la Brigada Internacional.
Yeah, there will be follow-up here for this international brigade. There's so many things we haven't been able to finish. There's so many mothers who still want to come. And I think that we have to keep giving follow-up here, especially with this topic of migration. As I was saying, these migrants are also disappeared persons. And so for me, we're going to continue to form ourselves and to prepare it so that it can be successful. This brigade was so much work. I know Charlene is exhausted from this, but we were able to do it. This is our last day here in Sonora. Last day of so much commitment that we've had to this effort, this great brigade. But we are satisfied, I think, to have achieved this so far and to visibilize and sensitize people to our struggle. Are we going to continue? Yes, we will continue.
Gracias,
as long as
Cecilia,
God allows us.
Charlene.
Thank you,
Vamos a pasar
Cecilia
al
and
cierre,
Charlene.
bueno, para
We're
hacer
gonna go ahead
ayudar a
and-
descansar a Laurel, que ha estado
close
traduciendo
also
al
to
inglés.
let Laurel
Voy a
rest a
cerrar
little
esta
bit.
parte en inglés
We're
para
going to
que
switch
Sole
English to
nos ayude a
Spanish.
traducir al español quienes así lo necesiten. Well, thank you so much, our speakers, for sharing your experiences, knowledge, hope, wisdom. We will continue to weave networks between the South and the North because we need to strengthen collaborative research processes in the service of social transformation emerging from below, from the reverse side of hegemonic history. Next Friday, April 29th, it's Brazil's turn. We will analyze the state violence promoted by the government of Jair Messias Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, and his followers. But we will do so from a discolonial perspective also, listening to the knowledge of women of Afro-diasporic communities in resistance in Brazil. We will also listen to the critical reflection of José César de Castro Rocha, a Brazilian scholar, thinker, who has decided in this last years to thinking about the rhetoric of hate in his country, particularly in President Bolsonaro rhetoric. And we will listen also to the theologian Cleusa Caldeira, whose thought is focused on contributing to the recovery of Black epistemologies and what she calls theoquilombismo, as expressions of re-existence amid this state violence where gender, class, and race intersect. And so finally, we would like to thank all of you for your inspiring questions, each one of you. Thank you, Maya Querales, for your amazing work as a research person, anthropologist, not only very enlightened, but also very committed. Your narrative, your thinking, and your colleagues at HIASP. Let us continue with all of us discussing Let us continue the dialogue in our local communities here at BC, in other communities in Mexico City, around the world, to continue weaving networks of listening, knowledge, and solidarity. Esperemos seguir en contacto y sobre todo con ustedes como brigada, como colectiva, buscadoras de la paz sonora. Seguiremos en contacto para caminar juntos, aprender con ustedes la dignidad, la esperanza y la fuerza. Thank you so much. See you next month. Gracias a todos. Y estamos con ustedes. Gracias de corazón.
Gracias, un abrazo hasta Sonora y a todos.
Thank you. Gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, de verdad, de corazón. Muchísimas gracias por escucharnos, por ser quizá en un momento nuestro portavoz. Y pues que gracias, de verdad.